What happens when a global EDM legend who has seen it all suddenly breaks down in tears? We are talking about Steve Aoki. You think you know his legendary work with the world's biggest group, but what actually happened when the cameras stopped rolling? What insane work ethic and raw dedication did he witness behind closed doors that drove him to tears? Was it relentless perfectionism or something deeper? Let's uncover the 7 reasons why Steve Aoki cried talking about BTS's professionalism.
Number 7. RM, the burden of leadership. Bridging 2 universes. A silent sacrifice. Imagine walking into a high-stakes studio session in Los Angeles, the air thick with anticipation and the hum of massive synthesizers, where global EDM music giant Steve Aoki is about to collaborate with the biggest musical phenomenon on the planet, BTS, and right at the forefront stands RM, the leader, carrying a monumental weight that most people couldn't even begin to fathom. Have you ever stopped to seriously think about what it actually takes to be the sole linguistic and cultural bridge for a group that is single-handedly taking the entire Western Hemisphere by storm? Steve Aoki didn't just see a rapper or a prolific songwriter. He witnessed a young man who was practically operating on zero sleep, painstakingly translating not just words, but the very soul, rhythm, and raw emotion of Aoki's explosive electronic beats into something that his 6 brothers could internalize and express perfectly in their native tongue. The sheer atmospheric pressure in that studio would have crushed anyone else, but Kim Namjoon stood there, a towering figure of intellect and profound humility, carefully breaking down complex musical arrangements while simultaneously shielding his members from the overwhelming, often brutal chaos of the Western music industry's relentless demands. Aoki vividly recalled the late-night sessions where RM would quietly pull out his weathered notepad, completely ignoring the visible physical fatigue written all over his face, to dissect every single lyric, ensuring that the cultural nuances and poetic metaphors weren't lost in translation, proving that his legendary IQ of 148 wasn't just a trivia fact for variety shows, but a vital, razor-sharp tool for their global survival and unprecedented dominance. Why would a multi-millionaire superstar of RM's caliber meticulously rewrite a single verse at 4:30 in the morning just because he felt the English slang didn't authentically represent BTS's core philosophical message of self-love and youth empowerment? It is because for Namjoon, artistic perfection isn't just about hitting the right notes or catching the perfect beat. It is about absolute, uncompromising emotional sincerity. Aoki was struck straight to the core, a genuine lump forming in his throat when he realized that RM was quietly carrying the dreams, fears, and voices of his entire generation on his back, constantly negotiating with foreign producers, endlessly explaining Western studio etiquette to his members, and fiercely protecting the artistic integrity of the group above all else. Think back to the legendary Mic Drop remix era. The aggressive, unapologetic, and fiery energy of that track required a massive cultural and stylistic attitude shift, and it was RM who meticulously orchestrated that transition behind the scenes, directing the vocal tones, explaining the intricate nuances of American hip-hop swagger to the others, and making absolutely sure everyone was comfortable before he even thought about laying down his own iconic verses. Aoki watched in absolute jaw-dropping awe as RM gracefully stepped back into the shadows of the studio to let his members shine during the recording process, only stepping forward to take the heat or fix a miscommunication if something went wrong, acting as the ultimate human shield, translator, and visionary director rolled into one cohesive force. Is it any wonder that a seasoned veteran like Steve Aoki, a man who has collaborated with the most egotistical and demanding names in Hollywood and the global EDM scene, found himself tearing up at the sight of this incredibly selfless dedication? There was absolutely no ego in the room, no arrogant demand for the spotlight, no diva behavior, just a relentless, grueling, bone-deep grind to ensure that the music spoke the absolute truth to their millions of fans worldwide. Aoki saw the heavy, dark circles under RM's eyes, heard the quiet, heavy sighs of exhaustion instantly hidden behind warm, polite smiles the second the camera flashed, and felt the profound, almost spiritual responsibility RM held towards his bandmates and army, realizing in that very vulnerable moment that RM wasn't just leading a boy band, he was spearheading a massive cultural revolution with his bare, tired hands. How many artists do you know who would sacrifice their own desperately needed rest to sit in a dimly lit studio for hours on end, not even recording their own parts, just to make sure a foreign collaborator feels completely at home and that every single syllable resonates with absolute, piercing perfection? That is the raw, unfiltered, and deeply moving reality of Kim Namjoon that completely shattered Steve Aoki's expectations and brought genuine tears of profound respect to his eyes, setting a standard of professionalism that is practically unheard of in modern music history. But if you think RM's extraordinary leadership and silent sacrifices were the only things that broke a seasoned legend like Steve Aoki, you are entirely mistaken, because what happened next behind those closed doors with another member is a story of literal blood, sweat, and unspoken agony that will make you question absolutely everything you thought you knew about what it truly means to be a global performer.
Number 6. Jin, the hidden agony of the silver voice, bleeding chords, a smile that deceives everyone. Have you ever been completely fooled by a flawless, radiant smile, only to discover a heartbreaking amount of pain and struggle hiding just beneath the surface? When Steve Aoki sat down at the mixing desk to produce the devastatingly beautiful vocal track, The Truth Untold, he expected top-tier pop vocals, but what he actually got from the eldest member, Kim Seokjin, was a raw, emotional revelation that completely shattered him and changed his perspective on artists forever. Jin is universally known as the upbeat, joke-cracking, worldwide handsome who constantly lightens the mood on every red carpet, interview, and variety show. But behind the heavy, unforgiving, soundproof doors of the recording studio, Aoki witnessed a man fighting a terrifying, silent battle against his own perceived limitations. Most people conveniently forget that Jin originally joined Big Hit Entertainment as an acting major with absolutely zero background in singing or dancing, meaning he has always had to work 10 times harder than the natural musical prodigies like Jungkook or Jimin just to keep up with the group's astronomical world-class standards. Can you even begin to comprehend the immense psychological pressure of standing in a vocal booth, knowing the entire world is waiting to judge your voice alongside some of the greatest pop vocalists of this generation? Aoki was absolutely spellbound when he learned about Jin's grueling behind-the-scenes routine, staying in empty, echoing practice rooms until the sun came up, obsessively repeating a single agonizingly high note until his vocal cords were practically bleeding and his throat was burning with physical exhaustion. During the recording of The Truth Untold, a song that demands the most fragile, emotionally naked vocal performance imaginable, Jin flat out refused to leave the booth. Aoki watched the sweat physically dripping down Jin's face, his knuckles turning totally white as he gripped the microphone stand as if his life depended on it, channeling every single ounce of his hidden insecurities, his fears of inadequacy, and his profound protective love for his members directly into the microphone. Why would a man who has already achieved unprecedented global superstardom, millions of dollars, and universal adoration punish his own vocal cords to the point of sheer exhaustion for just one single track? It is because Jin carries the immense unspoken burden of being the eldest brother, a silent guardian who absolutely refuses to be the weak link in BTS, fiercely determined to prove that his voice is just as vital to their soul-stirring music as his legendary visuals are to their brand. Aoki recounted how Jin would hit a breathtakingly perfect, crystal-clear falsetto that sent actual shivers down the spine of every single producer and engineer in the control room, only to immediately shake his head, apologize politely in soft, heavily accented English, and demand to do it again and again and again until it wasn't just technically flawless, but emotionally devastating enough to pierce the listener's heart.
There was a highly specific, unforgettable moment during the session where Aoki saw Jin step out of the booth for a brief break, completely physically drained, gasping for breath, looking as though he had just run a full marathon. But the absolute second another younger member walked into the room to check on him, Jin's posture instantly straightened, his heavy exhaustion vanished into thin air, and he cracked a loud, goofy dad joke, instantly shifting to heavy atmosphere back to lighthearted joy. This incredibly jarring duality, the agonizing solitary struggle of the dedicated artist, completely hidden behind the warm protective humor of the eldest brother, struck Aoki with the terrifying force of a freight train. He suddenly realized that Jin's constant cheerfulness wasn't just a natural personality trait, it was a deliberate, incredibly selfless sacrifice to bear his own heavy burdens completely alone so his younger brothers wouldn't ever have to worry about him. To hear Jin sing the heartbreaking lyrics of The Truth Untold, a deeply melancholic song literally about hiding one's true vulnerable self behind a beautiful mask, while physically watching Jin wear that exact metaphorical mask in real time right in front of him, was an experience so profoundly poetic, tragic, and moving that it brought a hardened veteran producer like Steve Aoki to actual undeniable tears. How can someone give so much of their pure soul, push their physical anatomy to the absolute dangerous breaking point, and then casually smile as if they didn't just bleed out their deepest emotions for the entire world to consume? Steve Aoki realized in that dimly lit studio that Jin's professionalism wasn't just about showing up on time or hitting the right notes on a sheet. It was about an unfathomable emotional resilience, a deep-seated humility, and a relentless quiet grind that never ever asks for public recognition or sympathy. Aoki has worked with countless A-list vocalists who demand luxury trailers, throat-soothing exotic teas, and massive entourages just to step up to a microphone. Yet here was a global icon in Jin, standing entirely alone in the vocal booth, armed with nothing but a bottle of room-temperatured water and an unshakable resolve to conquer his own insecurities. The sheer magnitude of Jin's quiet dedication, transforming himself from an inexperienced, wide-eyed actor into one of the most emotionally evocative and technically stable silver vocalists in modern pop history through pure, unadulterated willpower and sleepless nights, is a stunning testament to human endurance that Aoki admits he had never witnessed in the decades he worked in the ruthless Western music industry. The tears Aoki shed weren't just tears of basic admiration, they were tears of profound realization of the heavy, silent price Jin pays every single day to be the unbreakable emotional anchor of BTS, transforming his own private suffering into a healing melody for millions of fans known as ARMY across the globe. But if you truly think the oldest member's silent sacrifices and hidden vocal agonies were the absolute peak of this emotional roller coaster, you need to firmly brace yourself for what is coming next, because the relentless, bone-crushing physical intensity and terrifying dedication Aoki witnessed from the group's legendary dance line will genuinely make you question the absolute limits of human biology and passion.
Number 5. J-Hope. The terrifying shadow of the sun, shattered joints, a dance of absolute death. When you think of Young Hoseok, universally known and adored as J-Hope, your mind immediately conjures images of blinding, radiant sunshine, infectious laughter, and a bright, heart-shaped smile that can effortlessly illuminate the darkest of stadiums. But what Steve Aoki witnessed in the suffocating, intensely humid practice rooms of Big Hit Entertainment was a terrifyingly different entity altogether. Imagine walking into a sprawling dance studio, expecting to see a group of wildly successful millionaires casually running through their routines, only to be instantly hit by a heavy, intimidating atmosphere that feels more like a ruthless, elite military boot camp preparing for an actual war. Aoki was completely frozen in his tracks as he watched J-Hope, stripped of his usual bubbly variety show persona, transform into an absolute, uncompromising tyrant of rhythm and motion, his sharp, piercing eyes scanning the massive wall of mirrors like a predatory hawk searching for even the microscopic fraction of a mistake. This wasn't just dancing. This was a grueling, bone-crushing pursuit of superhuman perfection, and J-Hope was the merciless general leading the charge, demanding absolute physical subjugation from himself and his brothers to the beat of Aoki's explosive track. Have you ever actually stopped to consider the unimaginable physical toll it takes to perfectly synchronize 7 distinct human bodies moving at breakneck speeds, hitting aggressive, popping angles that literally defy the natural limits of human anatomy? Aoki sat in the corner, his jaw practically glued to the floor, as he listened to the terrifying, rhythmic thud of heavy sneakers slamming into the hardwood floor, heavily layered with the agonizing, sharp sounds of joints violently popping and breathless, ragged gasping that echoed off the soundproof walls. It was in this incredibly intense, almost suffocating environment that Aoki truly understood the sheer, terrifying magnitude of J-Hope's unspoken burden as the official dance leader of BTS, a role that requires him to push his own flesh and blood to the absolute breaking point just to set the uncompromising standard for the rest of the group. During one particularly brutal practice session that stretched far into the early, unforgiving hours of the morning, Aoki noticed a deeply unsettling detail that completely shattered his heart. Underneath J-Hope's loose, sweat-drenched practice pants, his knees were wrapped in thick, heavy layers of tight medical tape, completely bruised and battered in a mix of dark purple and black, a glaring testament to years of relentless, physically destructive floor work. Yet, when the heavy bass dropped and the music blasted through the giant speakers, J-Hope's face instantly shifted into a stone-cold, fierce expression of pure adrenaline, his body executing a hyper-complex, gravity-defying sequence with such explosive, fluid precision that it looked completely effortless, completely masking the screaming agony his joints must have been enduring at that very second. Why would a global icon, a man who has already conquered the Billboard charts and sold out stadiums across the entire globe, willingly subject his own body to such extreme, torturous punishment when he could easily afford to dial it back just 10% and nobody in the audience would even notice the difference? The devastating answer is that J-Hope refuses to cheat the audience. He refuses to compromise the legendary artistic integrity of BTS, and most importantly, he absolutely refuses to let his members down, knowing that if the dance leader shows even a single ounce of fatigue or weakness, the entire structural foundation of their world-class performance will instantly crumble. Aoki recounted a specific, incredibly chilling moment where the group had been repeating the exact same demanding 30-second dance break for over 2 agonizing hours, the air in the room thick with exhaustion and the suffocating smell of sweat. And while some members were visibly collapsing onto the floor in sheer exhaustion, panting heavily with their chests heaving, J-Hope simply stood there in the center, breathing completely silently through his nose, his eyes burning with an intense, unbreakable resolve, clapping his hands sharply and coldly commanding them to run it from the top just one more time. The sheer, frightening psychological endurance required to look your best friends in the eyes, seeing their physical pain and exhaustion, and still demanding more from them because you know it is the only way to achieve immortality on stage, is a heavy, dark responsibility that J-Hope carries with a terrifying, silent grace. Aoki, a man who has DJ'd for thousands of hours and seen dancers push themselves at massive festivals all over the world, admitted that he had never, ever in his entire life witnessed this specific brand of self-mutilating dedication to the art of choreography, realizing that the flawless, synchronized masterpieces armies consume in highly edited music videos are actually forged in a brutal crucible of literal blood, torn ligaments, and unyielding psychological pressure. The tears that welled up in Steve Aoki's eyes weren't just from witnessing immense talent. They were born from a deep, profound sense of horror and absolute, undeniable respect for a man who willingly sacrifices his own physical well-being, effectively trading his long-term health and bodily comfort for the fleeting, magical perfection of the stage. To see the sunshine of the group operate in the darkest, most punishing shadows of the studio, bearing the massive, agonizing weight of perfectionism without ever once complaining or asking for a break, fundamentally changed how Aoki viewed the very concept of hard work and professionalism in the entertainment industry. J-Hope doesn't just dance to the music. He physically dissects the beat, internalizes every single snare and bass drop, and violently forces his body to become the physical manifestation of the song, no matter how much it destroys him behind closed doors. But if you think this terrifying display of physical dominance and silent suffering was the end of Aoki's emotional revelations, you are gravely mistaken, because the very next thing he witnessed from another member completely redefined the concept of artistic desperation, pushing the boundaries of what it means to pour your absolute soul into the music. Number 4. Suga, the bleeding keys of genius, a shadow in the studio, the pain he chose to hide. Imagine stepping into a dimly lit, almost suffocatingly cramped studio space affectionately dubbed the Genius Lab, where the air is eternally thick with the unmistakable scent of stale black coffee, burnt-out electronics, and an overwhelming aura of sheer, unfiltered creative obsession, a place where Min Yoongi, known globally as Suga, operates like a phantom in the darkest hours of the night. Steve Aoki, a man who has traversed the globe and collaborated with the most eccentric, hyper-focused producers in the music industry, artists who routinely demand luxurious recording environments and a massive entourage of yes-men, was completely unprepared for the terrifyingly intense, almost monastic isolation that Suga willingly subjects himself to in the absolute name of musical perfection. When Aoki first witnessed Suga in his natural habitat, completely detached from the blinding glamour, the deafening roar of BTS's sold-out stadium tours, and the flawless idol image, he didn't see a pampered multi-millionaire pop star. He saw a starving, desperate underground artist fighting for his absolute life through every single keystroke, bass drop, and snare roll. Can you even begin to fathom the immense psychological weight of producing tracks that will be intensely scrutinized by millions of critics and fans worldwide, while simultaneously battling the deeply ingrained traumas of a grueling, poverty-stricken past? Aoki watched in silent, profound awe as Yoongi, with dark circles under his eyes so incredibly deep they looked like literal bruises, meticulously chopped, screwed, and rearranged a single vocal sample for over 4 agonizing hours, completely ignoring the basic human needs for food, water, or sleep, driven by a frightening perfectionism that dangerously bordered on self-destruction. This isn't just about making a catchy pop beat or securing another Billboard #1. This is about Suga extracting the darkest, most vulnerable pieces of his own traumatized soul and violently forcing them into the sonic landscape of their music. What truly brought Aoki to the absolute brink of tears, completely shattering his preconceived notions of manufactured idol rappers, was witnessing the sheer, unspoken physical agony that Suga was violently pushing through while recording his aggressively raw verses. Most people outside of the hardcore ARMY fandom didn't know at the time that Suga had been silently suffering from a devastating, chronic shoulder injury, a traumatic remnant from a horrific motorcycle accident during his pre-debut days working as a poor delivery boy to pay his tuition, an injury he kept fiercely hidden for years so it wouldn't drag down the group's meteoric rise or cause his brothers to worry. During a particularly explosive recording session for their intense collaborations, Aoki noticed Yoongi subconsciously gripping his left shoulder, his face instantly contorting into a tight, agonizing grimace of pure physical pain whenever he had to exert massive vocal pressure or aggressively gesture during a take. Yet, the absolute second the red recording light clicked on, that blinding, paralyzing pain was instantly weaponized into a raspy, guttural, venomous rap delivery that practically shook the soundproof walls of the vocal booth, entirely masking the physical deterioration of his own body. Every single time Yoongi raised his arm to adjust the heavy studio microphones, a subtle but terrifyingly sharp wince would flash across his pale face, a glaring reminder of the shattered cartilage and torn ligaments he was forcing to function through sheer, unadulterated willpower. Why would someone who has already cemented his legacy as a legendary producer and rapper, possessing more wealth than he could ever spend in a lifetime, refuse to get the surgical help he desperately needed, choosing instead to endure mind-numbing physical torment day in and day out? It is because Min Yoongi is fiercely, unapologetically protective of BTS and their artistic trajectory, viewing his own physical comfort and long-term health as an entirely worthless sacrifice if it means delaying a comeback or letting down the millions of fans who literally saved his life when he had absolutely nothing. Aoki recounted a deeply emotional, heartbreakingly quiet moment where he saw Yoongi finally collapse onto the small, worn-out leather sofa in the back of his studio, completely physically drained, his pale hands literally shaking from massive caffeine intake and total exhaustion, still muttering complex beat counts under his breath even while teetering on the absolute edge of unconsciousness. The sheer duality of this complex man, a notoriously savage, sharp-tongued rapper who spits pure fire on stage, transforming into a vulnerable, self-sacrificing maestro in the shadows, struck Aoki with the devastating force of a massive tidal wave, making him profoundly realize that Suga's music isn't just entertainment. It is a desperate, bleeding diary of survival and defiance. Aoki, who knows exactly what it means to endlessly grind in the electronic music scene until your ears ring and your vision blurs, felt a genuine, heavy lump form in his throat as he realized that all the massive wealth, the custom diamond Rolexes, and the globally sold-out Wembley stadiums haven't changed the starving artist inside Yoongi one single bit. He is still that fiercely determined, hungry kid from Daegu, desperately fighting the entire world with nothing but a cheap MIDI keyboard, a broken shoulder, and a dream that refuses to die. The absolute, uncompromising rawness of Suga's dedication, his chilling willingness to literally bleed over the tracks and rip his own emotional scars wide open for the world to scrutinize without an ounce of hesitation, sets a terrifyingly high standard of artistic integrity that most modern A-list artists wouldn't even dare to approach, let alone sustain for an entire grueling decade. Aoki shed genuine tears not just for the breathtaking, once-in-a-generation talent he witnessed, but for the profound tragedy and beautiful resilience of a man who literally sacrifices his own biological body and mental sanity to forge the unbreakable, gritty musical backbone of the biggest group in the history of the world. How many global musicians do you know who would silently swallow years of excruciating physical agony, refusing to complain or seek sympathy even once, just so their brothers could unconditionally shine under the massive stadium spotlights, without ever worrying about them? That is the chilling, awe-inspiring, and deeply heartbreaking reality of Min Yoongi that Steve Aoki will never, ever forget. A permanent, unforgettable masterclass in what true, bleeding passion actually looks like when the cameras are completely turned off and the glamorous facade is entirely stripped away. Number 3. Jimin, the angel's brutal confession, bleeding toes, a flawless illusion of grace. When the entire world looks at Park Jimin, they see an ethereal, almost impossibly perfect being, a mesmerizing, gravity-defying swan who glides across massive stadium stages with the absolute, effortless grace of a celestial entity. But what Steve Aoki witnessed hidden away in the cold, unforgiving backstage corridors completely shattered that beautiful illusion into a million jagged pieces. Have you ever wondered what terrifying, invisible price must be paid to maintain an image of absolute, divine perfection in front of millions of screaming fans who expect nothing less than a flawless miracle every single night? Aoki was fundamentally unprepared for the staggering, heartbreaking reality of Jimin's extreme, almost self-destructive perfectionism, a psychological and physical burden so impossibly heavy that it would instantly crush any ordinary artist under its suffocating weight. Imagine the scene. The blinding, deafening roar of a sold-out arena has just faded as the members rush off stage into the dimly lit, chaotic backstage tunnels for a frantic 3-minute wardrobe change, completely drenched in sweat, gasping for oxygen like drowning men. While most artists would immediately collapse into a chair to desperately catch their breath, Aoki watched in sheer, unadulterated shock as Jimin immediately cornered a performance director, his chest heaving violently, his eyes wide, and completely filled with frantic, unshed tears, desperately demanding to review the monitor footage of a performance that had just concluded seconds ago. Why was this global superstar, entirely adored by millions, practically hyperventilating in the dark? Because in Jimin's mind, his foot angled during a singular, split-second landing was off by a microscopic fraction of a millimeter, a tiny, totally invisible deviation that absolutely no one in the 60,000-person crowd could have ever possibly noticed, let alone cared about. But for Jimin, That microscopic mistake wasn't just a physical error. It was a devastating, unforgivable betrayal of the fans who had spent their hard-earned money and traveled across the globe just to see them perform. Aoki stood there, completely frozen in the chaotic backstage crossfire, genuinely horrified as he watched Jimin brutally berate himself, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated emotional agony, repeatedly apologizing to the exhausted staff and his members for ruining the entire show. The sheer, terrifying magnitude of Jimin's self-imposed accountability is something that Aoki admits he has never, ever encountered in the entirety of his decades-long career, dealing with massive Western pop egos who routinely lip-sync or half-heartedly mark their choreography without a second thought. This wasn't just typical artist anxiety. This was a grueling, psychological self-flagellation, a man willingly tearing his own soul apart in the dark just to ensure his light burned brighter for the audience. But the mental torment was only half of the agonizing equation, because the physical toll Jimin willingly accepts to execute his legendary, acrobat-level contemporary dance moves is straight out of a horror story. Aoki learned about the countless, agonizing hours Jimin spent alone in the freezing practice rooms long after the other members had gone to sleep, violently throwing his own body against the unforgiving hardwood floor to master those signature, gravity-defying mid-air barrel rolls and blindingly fast spins. We are talking about a man whose feet were constantly wrapped in thick, blood-soaked medical tape, his toes literally blistered and bruised to a terrifying dark purple, yet he would violently force them into tight leather performance shoes with an agonizing wince, instantly plastering on a radiant, angelic smile the absolute millisecond the stage elevator began to rise. Aoki recalled a specific recording session where Jimin was tasked with hitting a mind-bending, piercingly high countertenor note that practically defied the natural limitations of the male vocal tract. Jimin stood in the suffocatingly small vocal booth, completely isolated, aggressively clutching the microphone stand so hard his knuckles turned totally white, his face completely flushed with extreme physical exertion as he pushed his vocal cords right to the terrifying edge of snapping. When he finally hit the note perfectly, sending literal shivers down the spines of every single hardened producer in the control room, Jimin didn't celebrate. He immediately dropped to his knees on the studio floor, completely physically depleted, heavily gasping for air, instantly requesting to do it again because he felt the emotional resonance wasn't sincere enough. How do you even begin to process an artist who views absolute, jaw-dropping perfection as the bare minimum, constantly moving the goalposts further and further away until he is endlessly chasing an impossible, agonizing mirage? The realization hit Steve Aoki like a massive, suffocating physical blow to the chest, bringing completely involuntary, heavy tears to his eyes as he recognized the devastating tragedy of Jimin's existence. He is an artist so deeply, profoundly in love with his craft and his fans that he will willingly starve his own ego, physically brutalize his own anatomy, and mentally torture himself in the shadows just to give the world 3 minutes of magical, unbroken illusion. To watch a young man carry that terrifying, monumental weight of expectation on his deeply bruised shoulders, constantly battling the dark, whispering demons of his own insecurities while projecting pure, unadulterated light and love to the entire universe, redefined the very essence of human sacrifice for Aoki. He finally understood that Jimin's legendary, breathtaking performances are not born from natural, effortless talent, but are violently forged in a terrifying, hidden crucible of relentless pain, silent tears, and a terrifyingly beautiful desperation to never, ever be a disappointment. The tears Aoki shed were a profound, heavy tribute to the bleeding swan of BTS, a silent acknowledgement of the agonizing, hidden price of maintaining an angelic facade in a brutally unforgiving industry, permanently altering how the legendary DJ will view the concept of true, uncompromising dedication for the rest of his life. Number 2. BTS V, the baritone's hidden agony, a soul trapped in perfection, the breath that stopped time. Have you ever looked deep into the eyes of an artist who is so completely, terrifyingly consumed by his own emotional narrative that the boundary between reality and stage performance entirely ceases to exist? When Steve Aoki first encountered Kim Taehyung, known to the absolute farthest reaches of the globe as V, he was immediately struck by an almost intimidating, otherworldly aura of visual perfection that seemed completely untouchable. But what he actually discovered operating in the punishing, suffocating shadows of the recording studio was a deeply fragmented, profoundly sensitive soul fighting a relentless, agonizing battle to force his unique vocal identity into a mold that was never originally designed for him. In the hyper-competitive, tenors-dominated world of mainstream global pop music, possessing a heavy, breathy, deeply resonant baritone voice is often treated as an immense logistical challenge rather than a blessing, and V carries this heavy, isolating burden with a silent, devastating grace that completely broke Aoki's heart. Imagine standing in the dimly lit control room, the heavy, expectant silence broken only by the heartbreaking, soulful resonance of V's voice desperately trying to hit a soaring, incredibly demanding high note that practically tears against the natural, biological fabric of his vocal cords. Aoki watched in sheer, unadulterated awe as V completely closed his eyes, his universally praised, striking facial features violently contorting into a mask of pure, unfiltered agony, physically clutching his chest as if the heavy, melancholic lyrics were literally tearing a massive, bleeding hole right through his heart. V doesn't just sing a song. He completely, dangerously submerges his entire being into the devastating psychology of the track, weaponizing his natural, terrifyingly brilliant theatrical genius to physically manifest the pain, the profound longing, and the unbearable melancholy of the music directly into the suffocating atmosphere of the room. But this terrifying level of extreme emotional immersion comes with a horrific, invisible psychological price. Aoki was completely horrified to learn about the agonizing, sleepless nights V spent entirely alone in the dark, violently tearing his own vocal performances apart, obsessively listening to single, microscopic breaths and subtle voice cracks that absolutely no casual listener in the world would ever detect, brutally berating himself for not conveying enough sincerity in a track that was already drowning in absolute emotional devastation. You see, V is an old soul, a man deeply, fiercely enamored with the complex, unpolished, and raw imperfections of vintage jazz and classic blues, yet he is constantly forced to contort that deeply ingrained, soulful artistic identity to seamlessly fit the razor-sharp, meticulously polished, and heavily synchronized machinery of BTS's global pop dominance. Aoki recounted a specific, incredibly chilling instance during a high-stakes recording session where V had to deliver a line that required a highly specific, breathy vulnerability, a moment of pure emotional nakedness that terrified even the most seasoned, arrogant vocalists in the industry. Instead of relying on cheap studio trickery or robotic vocal pitch correction, V explicitly requested the entire studio to go completely pitch black dark. In that heavy, terrifying darkness, Aoki listened, entirely paralyzed, as V physically broke down in the vocal booth, letting out a raw, guttural, trembling sigh that wasn't just a standard musical note, but a genuine, bleeding confession of all his hidden fears, his profound, crushing loneliness amidst the blinding, deafening stadium lights, and his desperate, agonizing desire to be genuinely understood as a complex artist, not just blindly worshipped as an empty visual deity. The sheer, terrifying vulnerability required to strip away every single layer of your superstar armor, deliberately exposing your softest, most heavily bruised emotional underbelly to a room full of foreign producers and audio engineers, is a level of artistic bravery that genuinely brought immediate, hot tears to Steve Aoki's eyes. He realized in that suffocating, pitch-black studio that V's legendary, captivating stage presence, the piercing, hypnotic stares that can effortlessly melt camera lenses, the subtle, dangerous smirks that instantly break the internet and send millions into a frenzy, is actually a highly sophisticated, agonizingly heavy shield deliberately designed to protect a fragile heart that feels absolutely everything entirely too deeply. Even beyond the vocal booth, Aoki witnessed this exact same terrifying, self-mutilating dedication bleed directly into V's physical choreography. While he might not be the official dance leader, V's obsessive, maddening compulsion to perfect every single micro-expression, the precise, aggressive flick of his wrist, and the exact, mesmerizing angle of his jawline during a hyper-intense dance break requires a level of agonizing, repetitive mirror work that would completely destroy a normal human sanity. To watch a young man with the entire world violently screaming his name, holding the absolute pinnacle of unmatched global fame in the palm of his beautifully manicured hands, still feel completely, desperately inadequate in his own artistic expression is a tragedy so profound that it permanently altered Aoki's perception of the brutal idol industry. V willingly subjects himself to this grueling, psychological torture every single day, aggressively pushing his deep, velvety vocal register far beyond its natural, safe limits, intentionally risking permanent, irreversible physical damage just to ensure that his unique voice can seamlessly weave into the high-pitched, angelic harmonies of his brothers without ever dragging them down or disrupting the magical illusion. The heavy, exhausted sighs V let out after a brutally demanding, lung-crushing take, instantly followed by a soft, almost painfully polite apology in broken, hesitant English, completely shattered the glittering illusion of the untouchable, arrogant pop star for Aoki, replacing it with the heartbreaking, gritty reality of a desperate, bleeding artist who is constantly terrified that his absolute best will never, ever be good enough for the people who believe in him. The tears that silently rolled down Aoki's face were born from a deep, undeniable realization that V doesn't just perform for the shallow applause or the staggering paychecks. He literally bleeds for the art, sacrificing his own emotional stability, his mental peace, and his biological comfort to deliver a haunting, unforgettable sonic and visual experience that permanently scars the soul of anyone lucky enough to bear witness to it. How can a human being possibly carry the massive, bone-crushing weight of being visually worshipped as a literal, flawless god by millions, while internally feeling like a constantly struggling, desperate mortal fighting for mere artistic survival in a sea of relentless perfection? That devastating, chilling dichotomy is the absolute, terrifying truth of Kim Tae-young, a man who willingly sacrifices his own peace of mind in the agonizing dark so the entire universe can endlessly bask in his breathtaking, unearthly light. But if you truly think you have finally reached the absolute, undeniable peak of this exhausting, emotional roller coaster of a documentary, you need to firmly brace yourself and hold your breath for the final, earth-shattering revelation, because the terrifying, relentless, and almost inhuman drive of the youngest member is about to completely obliterate absolutely everything you thought you knew about human limitation and the horrifying, blood-soaked price of ultimate, legendary perfection. Number 1. Jungkook, the golden burden, collapsing in the shadows, the boy who bled for perfection. Have you ever stopped to genuinely consider the terrifying, almost suffocating psychological weight of being universally labeled as the golden magne, a seemingly invincible prodigy who is expected to be absolutely flawless at literally everything he touches, from singing and dancing to rapping and producing, all while operating under the microscopic, unforgiving scrutiny of millions upon millions of fans across the entire globe? When Steve Aoki finally witnessed the absolute, terrifying reality of Jungkook behind the heavily guarded, closed doors of their massive stadium tours and the suffocatingly intimate confines of the recording studio, completely stripped of the blinding pyrotechnics and deafening screams, he didn't just see a ridiculously talented pop star. He saw a young man who was practically destroying his own biological limits, willingly sacrificing his own flesh, blood, and oxygen to carry the astronomical expectations of his older brothers and the entire world on his heavily bruised shoulders. Imagine stepping into the absolute chaos of the backstage area during the peak of a grueling, 3-hour-long, high-octane stadium concert, the air thick with the smell of heavy hairspray, sweat, and sheer adrenaline, where the deafening roar of 90,000 people literally shakes the concrete floor beneath your feet. Aoki was standing there, completely overwhelmed by the frantic energy of the production crew, when he saw Jungkook violently stumble off the stage elevator, completely losing control of his incredibly powerful legs and collapsing violently onto the cold, unforgiving concrete floor the absolute millisecond he was out of the massive audience's direct line of sight. This wasn't just standard, expected tour fatigue. This was a complete, terrifying biological shutdown. A horrifying moment where a human body is pushed so unimaginably far past its natural, safe limits that it literally forgets how to function on a basic physiological level. Aoki watched in pure, unadulterated horror as a swarm of panicked medical staff immediately rushed over, aggressively strapping a heavy, plastic oxygen mask to Jungkook's pale, completely unresponsive, sweat-drenched face, his chest heaving violently in desperate, ragged gasps as he fought a terrifying, silent battle just to remain conscious in the suffocatingly hot backstage tunnel. Why would anyone, let alone a globally worshipped superstar with endless financial resources and absolutely nothing left to prove to the industry, willingly subject themselves to this terrifying level of brutal, agonizing physical torture when he could easily hold back just a tiny fraction of his energy and nobody in the massive, screaming crowd would ever know the difference? The heartbreaking, devastating truth that completely shattered Aoki's soul is that Jungkook absolutely refuses to give anything less than a terrifyingly explosive, 110% performance every single time he breathes, fiercely driven by a deeply ingrained, almost paralyzing fear of ever disappointing the 6 older brothers who literally raised him from a shy, deeply insecure 15-year-old boy into the towering global phenomenon he is today, and an unyielding devotion to the fans who gave him the world. Aoki was completely paralyzed, genuine, hot tears welling up in his eyes, as he realized that Jungkook's legendary, gravity-defying stage presence isn't just born from raw, natural, God-given talent. It is violently extracted through a terrifyingly self-destructive level of relentless dedication, a chilling, uncompromising willingness to literally trade his own life force, his precious breath, and his long-term physical safety, just to ensure the absolute, unbroken perfection of the BTS illusion. But the absolute, undeniable peak of this horrifyingly beautiful dedication, the specific, unforgettable moment that finally broke Steve Aoki down into genuine, heavy tears, happened just minutes after that terrifying backstage medical emergency. While most normal human beings would be immediately rushed to an emergency room or strictly ordered by management to cancel the entire rest of the show, Aoki watched in sheer, absolute, jaw-dropping disbelief as Jungkook, still deathly pale and trembling violently under the thick, heavy layer of stage makeup, aggressively ripped the plastic oxygen mask off his face the absolute second he heard the heavy, impending musical cue of the next song's explosive intro blaring through the massive backstage monitors. With a terrifying, almost mechanical, superhuman resolve, Jungkook violently forced himself up from the cold concrete, heavily leaning on a terrified staff member for a fleeting, agonizing second before taking a deep, shuddering, lung-crushing breath, instantly transforming his exhausted face from a dark mask of pure, unadulterated physical agony into a blinding, radiant, and intensely confident superstar smirk as he aggressively marched straight back toward the rising stage lift. The absolute, exact second that mechanical lift broke the surface of the main stage, plunging him directly back into the blinding, chaotic sea of millions of screaming fans, intense, blinding strobe lights, and explosive pyrotechnics, Jungkook violently exploded into a hyper-aggressive, flawlessly synchronized dance routine, effortlessly hitting perfectly stable, crystal clear, ear-piercing high notes without a single microscopic tremble or crack in his golden voice, completely and utterly erasing the horrifying, near-death medical emergency that had occurred just seconds prior in the dark, suffocating shadows. Beyond the terrifying physical toll, Aoki also vividly recalled the agonizing recording sessions for their English collaborations, where Jungkook, deeply insecure at the time about his foreign language pronunciation, would willingly lock himself inside a freezing, claustrophobic vocal booth for hours on end, brutally dissecting every single English syllable and consonant until his throat was completely raw, furiously refusing to accept any vocal takes that sounded even remotely imperfect. Driving himself to the absolute brink of psychological exhaustion just to flawlessly honor Aoki's original composition. How is it even biologically or psychologically possible for a human being to seamlessly transition from a terrifying, limp state of total physical collapse and crippling linguistic self-doubt to moving and singing with the absolute grace, precision, and aggressive power of an elite, untouchable musical deity in less than 60 seconds? Aoki finally, profoundly understood that for Jungkook, the stage and the recording studio are sacred, holy altars where human pain, extreme exhaustion, and standard biological limits simply do not exist. A magical, terrifying place where he is constantly willing to violently sacrifice absolutely everything he is just to see the pure, unadulterated, blinding joy reflecting back at him in the endless sea of army lightsticks. To bear witness to a young man who literally holds the absolute world in the palm of his heavily calloused hands continually choose to brutally punish his own physical body, endlessly chasing an impossible, agonizing mirage of perfection solely because he fundamentally believes he owes his very existence to the people who love him, fundamentally altered Steve Aoki's entire understanding of the music industry and the true cost of artistic immortality. The legendary EDM producer, a hardened man who has seen absolutely everything the ruthless, cutthroat entertainment world has to offer, wept openly and unashamedly not just because of the terrifying, undeniable musical genius of the Golden Magne, but because of the profoundly heartbreaking, silent, beautiful tragedy of a boy who will relentlessly run, dance, and sing until his lungs literally give out, silently bleeding and suffocating in the darkest shadows just so the world can continue to believe in flawless magic, permanently setting a standard of uncompromising, terrifying professionalism that will absolutely never, ever be matched in the entire history of human performance. So there you have it, the absolute, heartbreaking, and profoundly terrifying reality behind the blinding stadium lights, the flawless billboard-topping hits, and the perfectly curated social media feeds that completely shattered the seasoned soul of a global EDM legend like Steve Aoki. After witnessing these 7 young men willingly transform themselves into superhuman vessels of pure, unadulterated passion, violently sacrificing their own mental health, physical safety, vocal cords, and basic biological needs in the suffocating, lonely shadows just to fiercely protect their brothers and unconditionally honor their millions of fans across the globe, is it really any wonder that a hardened, cynical industry veteran broke down in genuine, uncontrollable tears? We as a society constantly look at BTS and see untouchable, glittering gods draped in custom designer suits, effortlessly breaking impossible streaming records, and smiling radiantly for the flashing cameras. But the absolute, chilling truth is that their unprecedented global dominance is actively forged in literal blood, shattered cartilage, extreme sleep deprivation, and silent, agonizing tears shed behind heavy, unforgiving soundproof doors where absolutely nobody is watching to offer them sympathy. What truly happens to a human soul when the relentless, agonizing pursuit of absolute artistic perfection completely consumes every single waking second of your existence, violently forcing you to constantly bleed out your deepest, darkest traumas and ignore excruciating physical pain just to create a flawless 3-minute pop illusion of pure, healing magic for millions of total strangers? Aoki walked into those studio sessions simply expecting to produce a few massive club anthems and collaborate with the biggest musical act on the entire planet. But he walked out profoundly humbled, fundamentally changed on a molecular level, and heavily burdened by the terrifying, undeniable realization that true, immortal greatness in this ruthless industry isn't just a natural gift you are luckily handed, but a brutal, punishing, and agonizing debt you must willingly pay every single day, with your own literal life force. As you plug in your earphones tonight and listen closely to the crystal clear, breathy falsettos, the aggressive, deeply traumatized rap verses, and the impossibly synchronized, earth-shattering beat drops that definitively define their immortal legacy, you have to genuinely ask yourself this one final, intensely chilling question. How much of their own raw, invisible agony are you actually casually listening to on your morning commute? And would you ever possess the terrifying, selfless, Strength to willingly break your own wings in the pitch-black dark, just so the rest of the universe could comfortably watch you fly. This isn't just a simple story about creating popular music anymore. This is a breathtaking, devastating masterclass in raw human endurance and the terrifying, unspoken price of absolute, legendary perfection, permanently leaving us all to wonder in breathless awe who will actually be there to hold them up when the massive stadium lights eventually go out, the deafening cheers fade into total silence, and the adrenaline finally, inevitably runs out.